Fortification of foods with vitamins and minerals. Fast facts. A fortified food simply has vitamins, minerals, or other nutrients that are not normally present in the food added to it during processing. An example, milk is often fortified with vitamin D as it does not naturally contain it. Vitamin D is beneficial because it enhances calcium absorption. However, there is a difference between enriched foods and fortified foods. During processing, nutrients are often lost and enrichment adds back the nutrients that were originally there. Historically, fortified foods have been very effective in virtually eliminating diseases that are caused by nutrient deficiencies such as rickets and pellagra. Implications for public health. According to the FDA, the main reason for encouraging the food fortification of foods is to maintain and improve the overall nutritional quality of the food supply in the United States as a part of the public health objective. Although fortification has increased vitamin and mineral consumption in the United States, there haven't been any studies that have shown that fortified foods are in fact improving our health, except for folic acid. There are even clinical concerns that fortified and enriched foods may be causing people to consume harmful amounts of certain vitamins and minerals. The controversial issue. There is a large debate around whether or not we should continue widely fortifying foods with vitamins and minerals. At a point in time, they were very useful, but the question has arisen if they are still very useful. We'll look at fortifying foods versus not fortifying foods. And the main concern is whether the risks may outweigh the benefits. So let's start with the benefits of fortified foods. Government agencies and food policy advocates often use enrichment and fortification to decrease nutrient deficiencies in large populations, and this is usually very effective. In the 1920s, companies started to add iodine to table salt in order to fight high incidence of goiters in the United States. Food enrichment and fortification programs have contributed to and increased nutrient intakes in the general population, as well as eradicated several diseases that have been linked to vitamin deficiency. Food fortification has helped meet the nutrient needs for many people in the United States population. And now, we'll look at the risks of fortified foods. Experts make the argument that the body absorbs added nutrients differently than when they are naturally occurring in the foods. Going back to the milk example, vitamin D is added to milk. However, fat is often removed from milk. We'll see in whole milk 1% and 2% and even fat-free milk. And vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, so it may not have the same benefit when added to the fat-free 1% and 2% milks. Many companies may use the synthetic version of nutrients, which may not be as effective as the natural form of the nutrients and vitamins. There can be an excess intake of some nutrients, and that can interfere with the metabolism of other key nutrients. For example, chronic excessive intake of supplemental zinc can reduce the absorption of copper and iron from other foods. There have also been adverse effects seen in excess calcium intake reported in both men and women. So it can affect multiple people on multiple levels. And with increasing availability of these fortified foods, the consumption of nutrients above the recommended levels will continue to increase. And the potential for nutrient toxicities will rise, as well as secondary complications, such as increased cancer incidence, as well as declining organ function. On a cultural impact scale, food fortification has been made very useful on a global scale in order to help fight hidden hunger on a large scale. There is even a little bit of evidence, there is only a little bit of evidence to show the impact of fortification on people's health in the developing world. It is limited, but is in fact growing. So there have been people fortifying foods overseas, and it has shown help, but there hasn't been much evidence to show. Researchers compared the costs for rehabilitation and treatment of children that could be suffering from spina bifida with the cost of adding folic acid to flour. The results showed that for every $1 that was invested in adding folic acid to flour, $12 would be saved in medical treatment and care for spina bifida. In Chile, when this was done, an estimated 38,417 birth defects were prevented when local flour was fortified with folic acid in 2012. The economic role that it plays. The economy of fortified food has played an important role in its implementation in public policy. Its cost effectiveness has allowed for fortification to have a high priority as a preventative healthcare intervention. Like as I previously stated, it has helped prevent and virtually eradicate many diseases. The high benefit to cost ratio that it has put fortification on the forefront of public policy as far as social sector investments. The benefits of flour fortification, for example, far outweigh the costs associated with producing it. For every dollar spent in fortifying flour with iron, $84 is saved by reducing anemia. Also, when looking at the productivity loss associated with anemia, it varies by the type of work. 17% is in heavy manual work, 5% in light manual work, and 4% in other cognitive effects. And the reductions in cognitive and work performance of substantial proportions of the population have detrimental economic consequences. So when more people are suffering from anemia, then more people will also be put out of work, which also could have a detrimental effect on the economy. Also, with the folic acid, going back to spina bifida, children with spina bifida, and which is a birth defect of the spine that results from folic acid insufficiency, is often primarily disabled and require a lifetime of medical care, which could be very costly in the long run for a person's family, and it also contributes to the rise of healthcare in the United States. Politics and policy. There are certain nutrients, including protein, vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, iron, vitamin D, vitamin E, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, vitamin B6, folate, vitamin B12, biotin, pantothenic acid, phosphorus, magnesium, zinc, iodine, copper, and potassium that may be appropriately added to food in order to correct dietary insufficiency that is only that is recognized by the scientific community to exist and known to result in nutritional deficiency disease. Nutrients may be added to a food that replace a traditional food in the diet in order to prevent it from having nutritional inferiority. And if the nutrient is psychologically available from the food, then it is stable in the food under customary conditions of storage, then it also may be added. When foods are added, when nutrients are added to foods, they must follow the regulations. The food, if the nutrient is showed by adequate scientific documentation to have been lost in storage, handling, or processing in measurable amount equal to at least 2% of the daily reference of protein and potassium, 2% of reference daily intake on a normal serving of food, if good manufacturing practices and normal storage and handling procedures cannot prevent the loss of such nutrients, if all the nutrients, including the ones listed, are lost in a measurable amount, are restored, and all ingredients in the food product contain and contribute nutrients are considered in determining restoration levels, the food is not subject to other federal regulation that requires or prohibits nutrient additions, or the food has not been fortified in accordance with other federal regulation that permits voluntary nutrient additions. A nutrient is listed on the Access Data FDA website and added to a food in proportion to the local caloric content of the food, the balance of the vitamin, mineral, and protein of it. And this is just the list of nutrients and vitamins that can be added to foods, and in the units of measurements they can be added per calorie. Legislation. As it currently stands, there are no laws that require the fortification of foods for things that have impacted public health. The Food Fortification Initiative encourages for there to be mandatory rather than voluntary fortification, because when there is legislation involved, it could lead to a countrywide fortification in order to help create the desired health impact. This is good, except when considering the people that may suffer from nutrient toxicities or may consume too many vitamins and nutrients. A countrywide fortification is usually achieved through legal legislation. The mandatory programs would be enabling regulatory authorities to monitor fortification for compliance with the standard, only to ensure quality of the foods, to create a business environment where all millers must fortify their foods and therefore incur similar costs, helping create and secure sustainability within the program, to distribute the health benefits across the entire population consuming the foods made from industrial mills, and to effectively remove non-fortified foods from the market. With these programs, we'd be able to achieve a nationwide effect where everyone is equally involved, the consumers are getting the same foods, And the people who are creating the foods, the millers, they're all having similar costs, so everything is fair for everyone. Their food can the nutrients to be added to the flour in the foods can be obtained overseas in a packet. They can be purchased within the United States, but it should all be regulatory and standards so that it is fair for everyone and everyone gets the same food, and it'll be easier regulated if everyone is getting the same amount of food from the same place. Legislation. Continue. It would also specify the types of grains to be fortified, including rice, wheat, and maize. It would also outline how and which types of each food will be fortified. And when it outlines how the food will be fortified and the penalties for noncompliance. The penalties for noncompliance means what would happen to the farmers and the millers and the producers of these foods who do not follow the rules. In what ways will they be penalized for putting the public's health at risk? It will also identify how much these changes will cost, including import duties, custom fees, inspection fees, provisional taxes, municipal dues, value added tax, and the good and services tax, and who will be paying the taxes for it. When considering this, it is very important because the money has to come from somewhere in order to make this something that is standard across the nation. The entirety of the cost cannot fall on the millers and the farmers to make these foods because it would become a government standard. Therefore, there would not have to be an out-of-pocket cost for the farmers. If it's something that's going to be affecting the entire nation, then everyone should have to pay the same amount for it. It is also recommended that countries separate their standards from legislation. The legislation requires fortification, while a standard would outline specific ranges of nutrients to be included, which is similar to something that we have now, which is more voluntary rather than being mandatory. Legislation usually requires a time-consuming and government action when it needs modification and creation as well. If the standard is a separate document, fortification levels can be more easily adapted as the country needs change. So the legislation would just be the laws that, again, regard the cost, import duties, fees, and other taxes, as well as the types of foods to be fortified. But the standards would be something similar to what was in the chart shown before, because it'll be easily adapted to how things are changing within the country. The foods and the levels of things that are more needed could be added and removed from lists more easily. Ethical considerations. Food fortification serves the primary food regulation objective of protecting the public's health and safety. Though it has been very useful and proven to virtually eliminate certain diseases in the general population, it may be considered questionable for those who may have a chance of taking in too many nutrients. In the policymaking, ethics may or may not have been completely considered and how it would affect everyone, but most foods that are fortified on labels as it stands today are labeled as such. So again, there's no legislation making it mandatory. It's just voluntary. So if somebody so a person can make their own decision to make fortified foods, but in the future, they may not have that decision. There may be legislation that requires all foods to be fortified. So, in that sense, it may not be considered ethical. However, it is ethical to still allow fortified foods to be on the market as it is in the best interest of the general population and as it is in the best interest of the general population and people are able to decide if they want to eat the fortified foods or not, and those who are benefiting from it can continue to benefit from its usefulness. And in summary and conclusions, food fortification is intended to be in the best interest of the public as part of the public health initiative. There are benefits to fortification, however, there can be some complications when introduced to a population in its entirety regarding legislation and ethical standards. It has been widely used on a global scale when provided to populations in dire need of nutritional supplementation, especially in flour and folic acid. The eventual cost of fortification proves to be a sensible economic change, so it wouldn't be too strenuous on the population, as in the long run, it may cost a little bit more in taxes, but it would save a lot in healthcare plans and healthcare costs. And it has been useful in eliminating nutrient deficient diseases, which I feel is the most important because things that once ran rampant are no longer seen as large of an issue. And these are my references.